Hello my glorious lot and welcome back to my vintage story. Now then, we are updating to 1.18 and it's going to happen very soon. So I haven't got a lot of time. So in this video I want to squeeze in as much as I can to show you how I got to the Iron Age. I have done a little tour of the server, but I won't be able to fit that into this episode because it would take too long. And I want to show you this other stuff first. I don't want to miss it out. Also, I have to start on the new server later than everybody else. About a week later to be exact, because I had a lot going on in real life when they launched Season 2, so I couldn't be there. But I will make sure you don't miss a thing. So let's get going. Increasing your health points by having a balanced diet was something that I had ignored for quite some time. And as you can see, I was deficient in grains and dairy. So to address my deficiencies, I decided to make some cheese. So I fed the sheep and they produced lambs. And so the next task was to do some milking, which wasn't an easy process. I hadn't bred them up very much at all. In fact, one of them was still a Generation 1. Don't know how she got in there, because I thought I'd got at least Generation 3 or above. I also had to watch out for the rams, because they were not keen on me milking their partners. I needed at least 25 litres of milk to start the cheese making process, but I did hope for a full barrel of 50 litres. And I can tell you now, it took some time. Once the production of lambs had been confirmed, I went back with my buckets. Finding the lactating mothers was a little bit of a task because they were all in together. But it wasn't long before one came forward and volunteered her milk. And that was my first successful milking. I tried to milk her again, but obviously you could only do one milking at a time. So that was my first 10 litres of milk, and it would stay fresh in the bucket for 8 days. I waited around for quite some time on that first occasion, hoping that I could find another one to milk, but they weren't too forthcoming. And I deduced that the two other lactating mothers was crammed into this corner. So I had to be careful if I wanted to avoid a butt-in. And I thought if I approached very carefully, I might just be lucky enough to get a second bucket. And I did. I left the third one for next time. I thought myself lucky that I'd got 2 buckets already. So I took the milk off to the cellar, commandeered a barrel, and placed the milk inside it. And I hoped that I'd get another 3 buckets in the morning. In the meantime, I started nibbling on grains, which was proving effective because it had already increased my health points from 16 to 18. So that was quite good. I was quite pleased about that. Now, if you saw the last episode, you'd know that I was in the Bronze Age already. And once I'd got to the Bronze Age, I was keen to get to the Iron Age. So it was time to go back to that mine and mine all the iron I found. I'd recently been doing some pathing with ore. We'd nearly got to the cursed lake with it, but not quite finished it. And there were 1 or 2 scary places, and ore had come a cropper on an occasion or 2. We won't mention that. But if you were quick enough and didn't stop, they didn't actually chase after you. It was always a good idea to keep an eye on your rear though, and I think I took more damage from jumping rather than running down the stairs. There was a very long section over a lake, and that was quite cumbersome to do. But we got most of it done, and once we started running out of pathing, we tended to concentrate on the stairs up and down the hills, which made traversing them much easier, and we'd come back to the pathing in between once we'd got more materials. The pathing made for a much faster journey, but the terrain around here wasn't very friendly at all. There was a lot of trees around, so you had to be very, very careful. I hadn't got that far to go, and I nearly met with a bit of a catastrophe over the brow of the next hill. But I made a swift turn to the right and escaped over a little pond, and I felt I was very lucky in escaping. It was a relief to get to the other side, to find out I wasn't going to be the next wolf's dinner. And nothing was in pursuit, so I could go on, very appreciative of the near miss I'd just had. Even though I'd been here before, it was quite difficult to navigate to. There was a lot of hills, a lot of valleys, a lot of trees, and everywhere looked about the same. And it was quite a balancing act, keeping my eyes on the terrain, the dangers that could be there around every corner, and the little star on the map that I was heading towards. But it wasn't long before I was there, and getting down safely was my next concern. but I just piled in, eager to get to that little tunnel that would lead me to my staircase. I was sure that all my torches will have burnt out by now, so I made sure that I lit up the outside, hoping that I wouldn't be here so long that they would burn out as well, before I sealed myself in, and I felt much safer. And as I went down to the level of the hematite, I recognised the frantic whirling of my temporal wheel in an anti-clockwise direction. Not good, I needed to be speedy. I stayed as long as I dared. In fact, I think I probably pushed it a little bit too far. But I was always thinking of that next chunk, that next block, that next bit of hematite in my inventory. And by the time I decided it was time to go up, I was already suffering and obtaining damage. But I felt quite confident that once I got up to the top of my stairs, everything would calm down and I would be fine. The damage was only slight each time. The scariest bit was me fluting my damage out loud. And by the time I got to the top of the stairs, my temporal wheel was going in the right direction. My wailing, though, seemed to be getting worse. And when I checked the damage log, it did seem that my damage was increasing. Had I left it too long? I wasn't quite sure. I just had to sit tight and hope it got better. A few minutes later, it was still getting worse and I was getting very worried. It was as if there was a temporal storm as well, but I'd had no indication that one was coming. There was no warning sign at all. It must have been because I stayed down too long. Oh my goodness, it was now down at 6%. Was it not going to come up at all? I had thoughts of digging further up the mountain. Wondered if that might relieve it. But I wasn't quite sure what was going on outside. There sounded to be an awful lot out there. And then I noticed the damage I was taking was decreasing. I think things were reversing. And I couldn't help but be tempted to have a look outside and see what was going on. But that was a bit of a mistake, which I rectified fairly quickly. My temporal instability went up and down a little bit more. And the visual disturbances, which were quite creepy, started to stabilise. And then things started settling down, and my temporal stability was improving. And all I could hear were drifters, and when I looked, the rift activity was apocalyptic. Just my luck. But I was safe enough, and I was recovered. So back down I went for another session. There was still a lot of mining to do. I still had a lot of pick left. And I still probably left it a little bit too long before I went up again. But I was quite chuffed at my 5 stacks of hematite. And I thought all the trauma of getting it was quite worth it, really. I mean, I hadn't died. And that time, there wasn't apocalyptic rift activity going on at the same time. So I felt quite confident that things would resolve very quickly. And they did. But it was time to get back home. I was quite happy with the amount I'd got, and it was just to make it home safely now. So I made a dash out of my hole and didn't find too much in the way of drifter to stop me. So I just crossed my fingers and ran for it, and hoped for no more wolves. The journey home was much smoother than the journey there, even though they were only near misses. But it was nice to get home nevertheless, and close that gate behind me, and know that I was in a nice, safe, secure place. My third attempt at milking went just as well as my first, and I was quite surprised about that. I did think I would be having a lot of trouble. So that was my third bucket. And after that, things went downhill. Although I thought my technique was the same, the ewes were getting too stressed to be milkable. And they told me in no uncertain terms they were having none of it. I thought I'd leave them alone for a while. So I'd got 30 litres of milk in that barrel now. I could actually make a cheese if I wanted to, but I wanted to fill it up. The next step in the cheese making process was to introduce some pickled vegetables. And you make those by putting them in barrels of brine, which I had done earlier. You could use a brine over again, so that was quite cool. And I used soya beans, because they lasted a long time anyway. And once the vegetables were pickled, they lasted an awful long time. And once you put the vegetables in the brine, it took 14 days of sealing them for them to turn into pickled vegetables. Making sure I was more nutritionally balanced was paying off, as I saw my health points increasing to 21. I needed a bit of protein, however, but that was no problem because I had made quite a lot of my food with just protein in it. I do need to have much more balanced recipes in the future though. I would have to see to that. And it was just a matter of looking at my bars and seeing what I needed next in my diet. The next process in iron making was to make some bloomeries, as you couldn't just smelt the hematite in a fire pit, and bloomeries were made of bricks from fire clay. And once they were fired, it was a matter of making the bloomeries in your crafting grid. And there were two parts to them, the base and the chimney part. And so each bloomery needed 12 bricks. Logically, the base went on the floor and the chimney went on top. And once you'd placed the two, it was just a matter of filling it up with charcoal and hematite. The hematite was reduced to nuggets with a hammer, and then you introduced it into the bloomery base. You could fit 120 nuggets in the base of the bloomery, and then 6 pieces of charcoal. And then with the torch in hand, you just lit it. It was as simple as that. Once the bloomery had stopped smoking, it was all done, and it produced 6 iron blooms. You couldn't get the iron blooms out just by taking them out. You actually had to smash the bloomery, during which you lost a few bricks, which obviously had to be replaced if you were going to make another bloomery. And what came out were iron blooms. I'd made 3 bloomeries, so that gave me 18 iron blooms. I soon found out you needed a lot of charcoal for this iron making process, and so chopping trees and filling my charcoal pit was an ongoing process. I had kept trying to milk the sheep, but they were very reluctant to give me milk, so when I did get my last bucket of milk, it was quite some time later. But it was quite an exciting prospect to think that I would soon have some cheese. So I ran back to my cellar to put in the last remaining bucket of milk. And then I added 2 of the pickled vegetables that I'd made earlier. And in 3 days, I would be making cheese. Wood chopping was one of those things you did on a regular basis in this game. You needed wood for all sorts of things, and if you had it to hand, it would make everything run much more smoothly. It was hard work, was wood chopping, and I often had to take a break and just relax a little bit, looking over what we'd all achieved. It was quite something. But alas, I couldn't stop for long. I needed 9 stacks of logs to fill my charcoal pit. And with so much hematite to process, I needed several trips to our designated quarry. I was quite keen to make my first iron ingot, so I put one of the blooms on to heat up. And while it was heating, I set 2 to make a helve hammer. I understood there were 2 options to making an ingot. You could either use your hammer, or you could use a helve hammer. I wasn't quite sure of the benefits of each, or which was quicker. So I thought I'd have both options open to me, and then I could see which I liked best. I would need 300 more bronze to make the helve hammer. Once the iron bloom was hot enough to work, I placed it on the bronze anvil. And I got out the bronze hammer, and I started chipping away. I understood that you had to chip away all the dark bits to reveal the light bits, and that the helve hammer would do that automatically. Wasn't too bad with the hammer. Did take some time though. And eventually you would end up with an ingot. So into the water it went to cool down. And once it cooled, I jumped straight in to get it out so I could have a look at my first iron ingot. And I thought that was pretty awesome. Looking at all the blooms I already had, I did hope that health hammer would make things a lot quicker. Had to wait for the health hammer to fire, so I got on with some other little jobbies around the house. My apple trees were very near picking, but I did spot one across the lake that was ready. It was a pear tree. And I set to with the job of picking them. It was while I was doing some more wood chopping that I spotted some quartz. And it suddenly dawned on me that I could actually mine that now because I had a bronze pickaxe. In fact, I was easily distracted from wood chopping and found I wanted to mine the quartz instead. So I found my bronze pickaxe and dove right in. It was so cool to be able to mine something I hadn't been able to mine right from the beginning. My wood chopping suffered though, and I found I hadn't cut enough wood to fill my pit, so I'd have to go back for some more. But I'd done some at least, and I had some left over from last time, so it wouldn't take much more. And when I got back, I found my apples had ripened, so it was time to do some more fruit picking. It was nice seeing my fruit chest filling up. I had pears and now I had apples, and there were quite a few more to pick. So I've no doubt that that will be quite full by the end of my picking sessions. While I was down here, I thought I'd take a look at my milk. My milk had changed into cottage cheese, and it was okay for about 56 days. So I could leave that a little while I got on to making my health hammer. So I'd broken down 3 ingots of bronze, and I smelted it and poured it into the mould. And then I had a look at what else I needed. And I needed some resin. In fact, I needed quite a bit of resin, and I think I only had 1 bit. I'd had a look round and I got a couple of trees marked, but this one wasn't there any longer. There was another one I had marked down at the bottom, past Maddie's house, and I hoped that one would still be there. So I set off to have a look and see if I could find it. Kept my eye out on all the trees I passed though, just in case. As I worked my way towards my marker, I spotted another tree with some resin on it. Someone else had obviously spotted it because it had a sign on it. And there were probably lots of other trees with signs on. I just didn't know where they were. I'd have to ask or Maddie when they were next on. Then I headed off for the second tree I had marked on my map. And there it was. And somebody else had marked the tree as well. So I was quite confident now there would be a few around. So having got a few pieces of resin, I started to make the bits for the health hammer. The first one was the health hammer base. That just needed 1 resin and 3 boards, so that was quite easy. The health hammer itself didn't need any resin, so that was quite easy to do. It just needed the health hammer head and 2 lots of 4 boards. And there it was. It looked a tiny thing in my inventory, but when I actually held it, it was a monstrous thing. Look at that. Wow. And just at that point, OreSkull came on. And I asked him about more resin. He knew where they all were. Nice. So now I had everything to complete the health hammer. The next part I needed to make was the wooden toggle. And for this, I needed 4 resin and 2 more lots of 4 wooden boards. I also needed an axle piece, and that went in the middle. And then I needed a lump of fat, and there it was. So now it was about putting them all together. And again, I hadn't seen this happening. So I was a bit clueless, really. And I also felt there wasn't much space in here. And I couldn't see where these could possibly fit together. I needed a bit of help with this. So I went over to Ors to see what his setup was like. I could see now where everything went together, but he had some extra bits on his. He had a clutch which could turn it on and off, and I saw in the wiki that that was optional, so I decided not to make it because it was just extra stuff. But I would need some angled gears so I could connect it to my axle coming down from above. And then I went inside to see the rest of his setup, which looked very complicated to me. I don't think I'd be doing something like that. So I promptly went back to make myself some angled gears. This required another bit of resin, but luckily I had some to spare now. And this also needed a log, some fat, and 2 sticks. And it also needed a chisel, the hammer, and a saw to make it. And all that was left was the resin. And there was my angled gear. So next, it was putting it all together with a little help from my screenshot. So the base, the toggle, which I'd put in the wrong place, so I had to pick that up and change my position to get it into the right place, which needed to be near to where the axle came down. And then the angled gear connected it all together. Now I needed to put the health hammer on it. Wasn't quite sure where to click with that, but eventually found it. And then I needed to put the anvil in the correct place, which was where the health hammer head would fall. I was excited to see it all together, but alas, there was no wind, so it wasn't working. It was a good opportunity for me to do something that Ore had suggested, and that was to check that I had full sails. So up on the roof I went to check, and as it happened, I hadn't. Sails power output just went to 80 kN, and it needed to be 100. So I got some more sails made, and I added those, and it went to 100. And the wind had just started, and I could actually hear it working before I got to the hammer. There you have it. The hell hammer at work. That was awesome. It did make quite a racket though, but just by breaking the toggle, it stopped it from working. So that was alright. So I turned my attention back to my cheese and decided it was time to do something with it. And I needed some linen for that. And if I right-clicked on the barrel, it would give me a curd bundle. Then I had to set it down on the ground, which was actually covered in sticks, so I had to remove some. Once set down, I used a stick to give it a handle. And then I needed to squeeze it by turning the handle. And once it was fully squeezed and let go, I right-clicked it to open it. And there was a bundle of cheese. I needed to add some salt to it, and that would turn it into raw salted cheese. And it needed to be left to ripen. Once ripened, it turns into cheddar cheese, and this will keep for just over a year. But you could use wax to seal it, and that would make it keep for a lot longer, 2.5 years. So I popped both cheeses on the shelf in my storage cellar and let them ripen. So now it was time to test out the Helve hammer and see how much quicker it was going to be to make my iron ingots. So once heated, I waited till the hammer lifted and popped it on the anvil. I popped under the bloom on because I expected this to be a fairly quick process. So I put another bloom on to heat so that I could do another one after I'd finished the first one, but this was painfully slow. I can imagine it would be quicker if the wind was stronger, so I'd have to test that when there was strong wind. But in the meantime, I felt I had to get out my hammer and give it a hand. It was certainly quicker working it together with the Helve hammer, and I'm sure it would be quicker if the wind was stronger. But at the moment, it was still painfully slow. I went on to make a few iron tools. I made my first iron pick. I made a chisel. I made a hammer. And I made some shears. There was just one more group activity on the server, and that was a scavenger hunt. I didn't do very well in that, I must say. And if you want to see how that went, look up Grimer or Tinnikin's channel. I've put links in the description below. My next video from Vintage Story will be the tour of the server, so watch out for that. The new updated server is up and running already. And on there you'll see Grimer, OreSkull, Maddie, Nebris and Tinnikin, who launched the server on the 30th of April. I followed on a week later, and I'll be showing you what I got up to, how I managed a late start, and where I've got up to so far. So take care everybody, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye now.